Right now, beneath your feet, there is a world that has never seen sunlight. It has no roads, no maps, no borders, but it has cities. It has wars. It has alliances that have been running for 400 million years, and every single meal you have ever eaten in your entire life came from it. We spend so much time looking at the world above, the green leaves, the golden wheat, the neat rows of crops stretching to the horizon, that we almost never ask, what is holding all of this up? Because beneath every farm on Earth, something extraordinary is happening right now. Billions of creatures are moving. Chemicals are being traded. Networks older than the dinosaurs are passing signals through the dark. And the farmer walking those fields above, he may not see any of it. But if it stops, even for a season, everything stops with it. This is the story of the hidden world beneath every farm. And once you know it exists, you will never look at the ground the same way again. Let's begin where everything begins. Not at the seed, not at the rain, but at the soil itself. Most of us, if we think about soil at all, think of it as dirt. Something you brush off your shoes, something that gets on your clothes, something brown and unremarkable that farmers till and plant and water and mostly ignore. But soil is not dirt. Soil is an ecosystem. One of the most complex ecosystems on the entire planet, and almost all of it is invisible to the naked eye. Scientists who study soil, they are called pedologists, from the Greek word pedon, meaning ground, have spent decades trying to understand exactly what is happening down there. And the more they look, the more astonished they become. A single teaspoon of healthy farmland soil, just 1 teaspoon, the amount you'd use to stir sugar into your tea, contains more living organisms than there are human beings on Earth. More than 8 billion individual creatures in many soils. Bacteria, fungi, nematodes, protozoa, arthropods, algae, all living, all feeding, all interacting, all working, in a space the size of your thumbnail. Think about that for a moment. The ground beneath a single step you take on a farm contains more life than our entire human civilization. And here is the thing that changes everything, that life is not random. It is not chaos. It is organized, it has structure, it has function, and without it the plant above cannot survive. To understand why soil life matters so much, we have to start with a simple question that turns out to have a complicated answer. How does a plant eat? You might think, through its roots, obviously. It drinks water and pulls in nutrients. Simple. But that answer skips over something remarkable, something that took scientists centuries to figure out and that farmers are still learning to use today. Plants cannot eat most of what is in the soil. That sounds strange. The soil is full of minerals, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, iron, magnesium, all things a plant desperately needs. But most of these minerals are locked. They are bound to soil particles in forms a plant root cannot absorb. They are sitting right there, millimeters from the root, and the plant cannot touch them. So how does the plant get them? This is where the hidden world steps in. Beneath every farm, there is a community of microscopic organisms, primarily bacteria and fungi, whose entire purpose in life seems to be unlocking those minerals and making them available to plants. Not by accident, not randomly, through an ancient, evolved, deeply sophisticated relationship that has been running for longer than flowers have existed. Scientists call this community the soil microbiome, and understanding it is one of the most important frontiers in modern agriculture. Let's talk about one member of this community in particular, because it is perhaps the most remarkable organism that most people have never heard of. It is called mycorrhizal fungi. The word comes from the Greek myx, meaning fungus, and rhiza, meaning root, fungus root, and that name tells the whole story. These fungi grow into a network of threads, called hyphae, so thin they are invisible without magnification. A single strand of hyphae is about 50 times thinner than a human hair. But these threads spread through the soil in every direction, covering distances that root alone could never reach. And here is where it gets extraordinary. These fungi actually connect to the plant's roots. Not loosely, they physically merge with the root cells, creating a joint structure that is half plant, half fungus. Scientists call this structure a mycorrhiza, and once this connection is made, something that looks almost like trade begins. The plant sends sugar down through its roots to the fungus. Sugar it has made through photosynthesis, from sunlight and air. In exchange, the fungus sends water and minerals back up, phosphorus especially, which plants need desperately but which is extremely hard to absorb from soil. This is a trade that has been happening for approximately 450 million years. Scientists know this because they have found fossilized mycorrhizal connections in plant fossils from the Ordovician period, a time long before trees, before dinosaurs, before almost everything we recognize about life on Earth. Some researchers believe it was this partnership that allowed the first plants to colonize land at all. Without the fungus, plants might have stayed in the water forever. And today, scientists estimate that over 90% of all land plant species, including most of the crops that feed humanity, still depend on mycorrhizal fungi to survive. But the mycorrhizal fungi do something else. Something that, when scientists first discovered it in detail in the 1980s and 90s, changed the way we think about forests, farms, and even plant intelligence. They connect plants to each other. Those threads don't just connect one plant to the soil. They connect plant to plant, root to root, across entire fields. A single fungal network can link hundreds of plants in a community. Scientists have nicknamed this structure the Wood Wide Web because it was first discovered in forests, where trees use it to communicate and share resources. But it happens in farms too. Through these networks, plants can pass nutrients to neighbors that are struggling. A plant in deep shade, getting little sunlight and producing little sugar, can receive carbon from a neighbor that is thriving. In times of drought, water can be redistributed through the network toward the driest plants. And perhaps most remarkably of all, plants can send warning signals through the network. When one plant is attacked by insects or disease, it releases chemical signals into its roots. Those signals travel through the mycorrhizal network to neighboring plants, and the neighboring plants, before they have been touched, before any pest has even arrived, begin producing defensive chemicals in their leaves. They are warned, through the underground network, by their neighbors. This is not metaphor. This is not imagination. This has been documented in laboratory conditions and increasingly in field conditions as well. Plants communicate through the soil, and the mycorrhizal fungi are the cables. Now, scientists are careful to say this is not intelligence in the way we think of human intelligence. Plants do not think or feel, but they respond to information in ways that look, from the outside, astonishingly like a conversation. Now here is the question that every farmer should be asking, and that more and more farmers are beginning to ask. What happens when we damage this network? For most of the 20th century, industrial agriculture did not know this underground world existed in its full complexity. Farmers were taught to focus on the soil as a growing medium, a physical substrate to hold roots and deliver water. The chemistry that mattered was the chemistry you could measure and add: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, NPK, the three letters that defined a century of farming. Synthetic fertilizers made from industrial processes, primarily through a method called the Haber-Bosch process, developed in the early 1900s, allowed farmers to flood their soil with nitrogen. And it worked. Crop yields shot up. The green revolution of the mid-20th century fed billions of people who might otherwise have starved. That is a real achievement, and it should not be forgotten. But there were consequences, one fully anticipated. When you flood soil with synthetic nitrogen, the bacteria that normally fix nitrogen from the air, bacteria that plants evolved alongside for hundreds of millions of years, have less work to do. Their populations decline. The delicate balance of the soil microbiome shifts. When you till soil, turn it over mechanically, as most industrial farms do before planting, you break apart those mycorrhizal networks. The fungal threads, which took months or years to establish, are shredded in minutes by the tractor blade. The plant that grows in that field after tilling must start from scratch, building new fungal connections. And in many cases, the fungi that should be there have been so depleted that the connections never fully form. When you apply certain pesticides, particularly fungicides, chemicals designed to kill fungi, you can destroy the very organisms the plant depends on most. And the result, visible in many parts of the world today, is soil that has become dependent, like a patient who has been on external medication so long that the body has forgotten how to regulate itself. The soil needs more and more synthetic input to produce the same result, because the natural systems underneath have been stripped away. Some scientists call this a soil health crisis. They point to data showing that in parts of heavily farmed land across North America, Europe, and Asia, topsoil depth has declined dramatically over the past century. The United States alone has lost roughly half of its original topsoil since intensive farming began. Half in a century. Topsoil that took nature 10,000 years to build. But this is not only a story of damage. It is also a story of discovery, of farmers and scientists who are looking at the soil in a new way and beginning to ask, can we bring it back? Because the hidden world beneath a farm is resilient, it wants to return. Given the chance, it rebuilds itself with a determination that is almost moving to witness. Let's go deeper into that world. Let's meet some of its other residents. Because fungi, remarkable as they are only one part of this community. If the fungi are the cables of the underground network, then bacteria are the engineers. There are more species of bacteria in a handful of soil than scientists have yet cataloged. Most of them do not have names. Most of them have never been grown in a laboratory. We know they exist because of DNA sequencing, a technique that allows scientists to read the genetic material in a soil sample and identify what creatures are present even without ever seeing them alive. And what those DNA sequences reveal is staggering. A single gram of forest soil can contain tens of thousands of distinct bacterial species. Agricultural soil typically has fewer. One of the first measurable impacts of intensive farming is a reduction in bacterial diversity. But even in a conventionally managed farm field, there are thousands of species doing thousands of different jobs simultaneously. What jobs? Let's talk about one of the most important, nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen is the element that plants need more than almost any other. It is the building block of proteins, of chlorophyll, of DNA itself. Without nitrogen, a plant cannot grow. The atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. It is everywhere, in extraordinary abundance. But most plants cannot use atmospheric nitrogen directly. It has to be converted, broken apart, and reformed into a compound the plant can absorb, like ammonium or nitrate. Who does that conversion? Bacteria. Certain bacteria, most famously a group called Rhizobia, have the unique ability to take nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil in a usable form. This process is called nitrogen fixation, and it is one of the most important chemical reactions on Earth. Without it, the nitrogen cycle, the system that moves this essential element through living things, would collapse. Rhizobia form a partnership with legume plants, beans, peas, clover, lentils, that is almost as beautiful as the mycorrhizal relationship. The bacteria enter the plant's roots and form nodules, tiny pink or reddish bumps you can see if you pull up a bean plant and look carefully. Inside those nodules, the bacteria convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium, which the plant absorbs. In return, the plant provides sugar. Again, the same ancient deal: carbon for chemistry, sugar for survival. Farmers who understand this plant legumes as cover crops or in rotation with other crops. Not because the legume is always the most profitable plant, sometimes it is not, but because it is rebuilding the soil's nitrogen for everything that comes after. It is an investment in the hidden world, an acknowledgement that the underground community deserves feeding too. Now, from the invisible to the almost visible. Because the hidden world is not only microscopic. The earthworm is perhaps the most famous resident of the soil world, and yet most people don't truly understand what it does or why farmers who find earthworms in their fields quietly celebrate. Charles Darwin, yes, the same Darwin who developed the theory of evolution, spent the last years of his scientific life obsessed with earthworms. He wrote an entire book about them in 1881. He called them one of the most important animals in the history of the world. At the time, many scientists thought he had lost his mind. He hadn't. Earthworms do something that seems simple but is in fact extraordinary. They eat soil. They ingest soil particles and organic matter, dead leaves, decomposing roots, bacteria, fungi, pass it through their bodies, and excrete it as material called castings. And worm castings are, by almost any measure, the richest natural fertilizer on Earth. They contain 5 times the available nitrogen of the surrounding soil, 7 times the available phosphorus, 11 times the available potassium. Those numbers come from research by agricultural scientists who have been studying worm castings for decades. But the worm's contribution goes beyond chemistry. As an earthworm moves through the soil, it creates tunnels. Those tunnels do something crucial. They allow air and water to move through the soil. This process is called aeration and drainage, and it matters enormously to plant roots. Plant roots need oxygen, not just water, oxygen. And in compacted soil, the kind that forms when heavy machinery runs over a field repeatedly or when there is no organic activity to keep the soil loose, there is very little oxygen. The roots suffocate. The plant weakens. Yields decline. Earthworm tunnels solve this. They create a ventilation system through the soil. Water drains more efficiently, preventing the waterlogging that can drown roots. Air moves more freely, and the plant roots themselves can penetrate more easily into deeper soil layers, accessing minerals and moisture that surface roots cannot reach. A field rich in earthworms, which generally means a field with healthy organic matter, minimal tillage, and a living soil community, can have water infiltration rates many times higher than a compacted, worm-poor field. In practical terms, during a heavy rain, a healthy soil absorbs more water. During a drought, it holds more moisture. The worms are building the farm's resilience with every tunnel they dig. There is another group in this underground world that we need to talk about. A group that does work so essential that without it, the entire system would collapse within decades. They are called decomposers, and their job is to take death and turn it into life. Every leaf that falls from a tree, every dead root, every insect that dies in the soil, every crop residue left after harvest, all of this organic material contains carbon, the fundamental building block of life. And if that carbon simply accumulated without being broken down, it would form an impenetrable layer. The nutrients locked inside dead matter would stay locked. The cycle of life would stop. Decomposers break it open. The major decomposers in agricultural soil are fungi, bacteria, and a group of small animals called detritivores. Creatures like springtails, mites, millipedes, and beetle larvae that shred and fragment organic material into smaller pieces, making it easier for fungi and bacteria to finish the job. The end product of decomposition is humus. Not hummus, the food humus spelled differently, a dark, rich, stable organic material that is one of the most valuable substances in agriculture. Humus is what gives healthy topsoil its dark color, that rich, almost chocolate-brown appearance that farmers have always prized. It holds water like a sponge, retaining moisture in dry periods. It binds soil particles together into a structure called aggregation, which gives soil its crumbly, airy texture, what farmers call good tilth. It provides a slow-release reservoir of nutrients, and it stores carbon, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and locking it into the ground, which is why soil scientists have recently become important voices in conversations about climate change. One of the least known facts about climate is that agricultural soils have the potential to store enormous amounts of carbon, and soils managed in ways that support the decomposer community, minimal tillage, cover crops, composting, organic matter addition, tend to build humus and store carbon, while soils managed in ways that destroy the decomposer community tend to release carbon back into the atmosphere. The farm is not just producing food, it is interacting with the climate of the entire planet. Let's talk about something that might make you slightly uncomfortable. In this hidden world, beneath that peaceful-looking field, there is also tremendous violence. Not metaphorical violence, actual predation, actual killing. The soil is full of predators. There are nematodes, microscopic roundworms, the most abundant animals on Earth by number of 2 distinct types. Some nematodes feed on bacteria and fungi, keeping those populations in check. Others are predatory nematodes that hunt and consume other nematodes, injecting digestive enzymes into their prey and absorbing the resulting fluid. There are protozoa, single-celled organisms that move through water films on soil particles, engulfing bacteria with extraordinary speed. A single protozoan can consume tens of thousands of bacteria in a single day. There are predatory mites, 8-legged creatures related to spiders, invisible without magnification, that hunt springtails, nematodes, and other small organisms through the dark soil channels. And there is something called parasitism, which in the soil world reaches extraordinary levels of complexity. Certain fungi, for example, have evolved to trap nematodes. They grow rings of hyphae, fungal threads that form perfect loops in the soil. When a nematode passes through a loop, the loop contracts almost instantaneously, trapping the worm. The fungus then grows into the nematode's body and consumes it from inside. This is called a nematode-trapping fungus, and it is not rare. Multiple species have been identified, and they are present in many agricultural soils. Scientists are studying whether they can be encouraged to help control harmful nematode species, the parasitic types that attack plant roots, as a biological alternative to chemical nematicides. This is one of the most exciting frontiers in sustainable agriculture. The idea that the soil itself contains predators that naturally control plant pests, if we can just stop destroying them. Which brings us to something that farmers encounter with a fear that no one who hasn't farmed can quite understand. Root disease. A plant can look perfectly fine above ground, green leaves, upright stem, apparently healthy, and be dying below the soil line, attacked by pathogens that a farmer cannot see until it is too late. The primary underground plant pathogens are fungi and something called oomycetes, water molds that were long classified as fungi but are actually more closely related to algae. They have names that sound almost fictional but represent very real agricultural catastrophes: Fusarium, Pythium, Phytophthora, Rhizoctonia. Phytophthora infestans, for example, a water mold that attacks potato roots and stems, was responsible for the Irish potato famine of the 1840s. Over 1 million people died. 2 million emigrated. The population of Ireland fell by 20 to 25% in just a few years, not because of a war, not because of a drought, but because of a microscopic organism spreading through the soil and killing potato crops from below. That is the power of the hidden world. When it turns against a crop, the consequences can be measured in human lives. Modern farmers face root disease constantly. Fusarium root rot in wheat and barley. Pythium damping off in seedlings, where young plants simply collapse at the base and die within days of germinating. Phytophthora root rot in soybeans. Black root rot in strawberries. The conventional response has been fungicide chemical application to kill the pathogen, and fungicides work, but they also kill the beneficial fungi, the mycorrhizal partners, the decomposers, the nematode trappers. They are a blunt instrument in a situation that requires precision. The emerging approach, still being developed, still being tested, but showing real promise, is biological control. The idea that certain soil organisms can protect plants from disease naturally, that a healthy, diverse soil microbiome acts as an immune system for the crop. Research has shown that soils with high microbial diversity tend to suppress plant pathogens more effectively than soils with low diversity. The mechanism varies. Some beneficial bacteria produce antibiotics that kill pathogens. Some fungi compete with pathogenic fungi for space and resources, crowding them out. Some organisms trigger the plant's own defense responses, essentially vaccinating it against future attack. One particularly promising group of bacteria is called Bacillus subtilis, a common soil bacterium that produces compounds toxic to a range of fungal and bacterial plant pathogens, without harming the beneficial organisms. It is already being developed into commercial biological control products, and farmers around the world are beginning to use it alongside or instead of synthetic fungicides. The soil is not just a growing medium, it is a pharmaceutical laboratory. And we are just beginning to read its medicine cabinet. Let's talk about water, because water and soil are inseparable, and what happens to water in the hidden world is one of the most important stories in agriculture. When rain falls on a farm, something happens in the first few seconds that determines everything about whether that water becomes a resource or a problem. If the soil is healthy, if it has good structure, abundant organic matter, active biological life, the rain is absorbed quickly. Water moves down through channels created by roots, earthworm tunnels, and fungal networks. It reaches deeper layers. It is stored. The soil acts like a sponge. If the soil is compacted or degraded, if the biological community has been damaged, if there is little organic matter to hold structure, the rain hits the surface and runs off. It carries topsoil with it. It causes erosion. It flows into streams, carrying with it the fertilizers and pesticides applied to the field, causing a cascade of problems downstream. Algae blooms, dead zones in rivers and lakes, contamination of drinking water. This process, water running off farm fields rather than soaking in, is one of the largest contributors to agricultural water pollution globally, and it is fundamentally a soil health problem. The organisms in the healthy soil, the bacteria coating soil particles and making them water-stable, the fungi binding particles into aggregates that resist breaking apart, the earthworms creating drainage channels. They are what allows water to enter rather than run off. They are the farm's water management system. Soil scientists measure something called water holding capacity, how much water a soil can retain between rains, and healthy, biologically active soil consistently outperforms degraded soil on this measure. In drought conditions, the difference can be the difference between a surviving crop and a failed one. Some of the most drought-resistant farming systems in the world, systems developed in dry climates, often by indigenous farmers over centuries, work primarily by maximizing soil biological activity and organic matter. They don't fight the climate. They build a soil that can absorb water when it comes and hold it when it doesn't. Now let's talk about something that is changing the way the most innovative farmers in the world think about their land. It is called regenerative agriculture. The word regenerative is chosen deliberately. Not sustainable. Sustainable implies maintaining what you have. Regenerative means actively rebuilding what has been lost, going backward in the best possible sense. trying to restore to agricultural land the biological complexity that centuries of plowing, synthetic inputs, and monoculture have removed. The principles of regenerative agriculture, when you look at them closely, are really a list of ways to protect and encourage the hidden world. Minimal or no tillage, leaving the soil undisturbed so that mycorrhizal networks can establish and persist. Cover cropping, growing plants in the off-season, not for harvest, but to feed the soil biology with living roots. Crop rotation, alternating what grows in a field so that the underground community has a diversity of inputs rather than the same thing year after year. Reducing synthetic inputs, giving the soil biology space to do the work it evolved to do. Adding organic matter, compost, manure, crop residues, to feed the decomposers and build humus. None of these are new ideas, interestingly. Traditional farmers in many parts of the world practiced most of them for centuries before industrial agriculture arrived. The regenerative movement is, in many ways, a rediscovery, now supported by the science to explain why those old practices worked. And the results, documented now in enough farms over enough years to be credible, are striking. Farms that transition to regenerative practices typically see a decline in yields in the first few years. The soil biology needs time to rebuild. But after 5 to 10 years, yields often recover to comparable levels while input costs decrease significantly. And the soil continues to improve year after year, rather than degrading year after year. More importantly, and this is what regenerative farmers often talk about most passionately, the land feels different, more alive, more resilient, more capable of handling whatever the weather throws at it. The hidden world has come back. Let's take a moment to go deeper into something that most people don't think about when they think about farms. The edges. The borders between farm fields and the surrounding landscape, hedgerows, grass strips, wildflower margins, woodland edges, are not wasted space. They are reservoirs. They are the storage tanks from which the hidden world refills itself. When a field is tilled or treated with pesticides, the organisms that survive often survive because they were in the edges. The hedgerow, with its undisturbed root systems and accumulated organic matter, maintains fungal networks and bacterial communities that can slowly recolonize the field after disturbance. This is why farmers who remove every hedge, plow every corner, and maximize every square meter of planted land often find their soil biology declining faster than farmers who leave margins intact. The edges are the reserve army of the hidden world. There is a concept in ecology called a refugia, places where species survive during unfavorable conditions, and from which they can recolonize when conditions improve. In agricultural landscapes, the field margins are refugia for soil organisms. And increasingly, agricultural scientists are recommending that farmers plant deliberately diverse margins, mixtures of deep-rooted grasses, flowering plants, and native species, specifically to maintain these reservoirs of soil life. It is a different way of seeing a farm, not as a maximally cropped space, but as a landscape, a mosaic of field and edge, of crop and refuge, of the above-ground world we manage and the underground world we serve. The hidden world is also a world of extraordinary communication, of chemistry used not as a weapon but as a language. Plant roots release a steady stream of chemical compounds into the soil around them. This zone around the root is called the rhizosphere, from the Greek word for root, again, and it is perhaps the most biologically active square centimeter on Earth. The chemicals a root releases are not random. They are a curated mixture of sugars, amino acids, organic acids, and specialized compounds called root exudates. And these chemicals serve a purpose. They attract specific microorganisms. They are, in essence, an invitation. Different plants invite different communities. A wheat root exudate attracts a different set of bacteria and fungi than a bean root exudate. A tomato plant calls for different partners than a pepper plant growing beside it. Scientists are still mapping the full complexity of this chemical communication, but what is emerging is a picture of extraordinary specificity. Plants are not passively sitting in the soil, waiting for whatever microorganisms happen to arrive. They are actively recruiting. They are curating their underground community. They are feeding the organisms they want and, in some cases, producing compounds that suppress organisms they don't. This is called the rhizosphere effect, and it is one of the most promising areas in modern agricultural research. If scientists can understand which compounds attract which beneficial microorganisms, they might be able to develop crop varieties that recruit their own biological support systems more effectively, reducing the need for external inputs and building soil health through the crops themselves. The plant is not a passive subject of the soil. It is a participant, an architect of its own underground environment. It is worth pausing here, in the middle of this story, to consider something philosophical. For most of human history, we did not know this world existed. We knew that some soils were better than others. We knew that certain farming practices led to good harvests and others to bad ones. We knew that fields left fallow, unplanted, resting, often recovered their productivity. We knew that manure and compost made crops grow better. We knew the outcomes. We didn't know the mechanism. The microscope was invented in the 17th century. Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch cloth merchant with an extraordinary gift for lens making, was the first person to see bacteria in 1676. He called them animalcules, tiny animals. He was amazed. He described them swimming in drops of water, moving, spinning, living. But connecting those tiny creatures to the productivity of farmland, that took another 200 years. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch established in the 19th century that microorganisms could cause disease. Pasteur proposed that soil microbes might also be essential to the fertility of agricultural land, one of his many visionary ideas that took decades to be fully appreciated. It was only in the 20th century, and particularly in its second half, that soil science developed the tools and the understanding to begin mapping what actually lives underground and what it does. And it was only in the 21st century, with the arrival of cheap DNA sequencing technology, that scientists began to grasp the full complexity. Before genomic sequencing, we could only study organisms we could culture in a laboratory, grow them on a petri dish, observe them, analyze them. But most soil organisms cannot be grown in a laboratory. They evolved in the three-dimensional, chemically complex, biologically interdependent world of the soil, and they simply don't survive in isolation. Genomic sequencing changed everything. Now scientists can take a soil sample, extract all the DNA from it, sequence it, and identify every organism present, whether it can be cultured or not. And what they are finding is that the vast majority of soil life was previously unknown to science. New species are still being discovered in agricultural soils around the world, not by finding new places to look, but by looking properly at places we have stood on for 10,000 years. We have been farming this hidden world for millennia without knowing it was there. This genomic revolution in soil science is now feeding back into practical agriculture in ways that are beginning to change what farmers actually do. Soil health testing used to mean measuring pH, measuring nitrogen content, measuring phosphorus, maybe checking soil texture. These are important measurements and farmers still use them, but they tell you about the chemistry and physics of soil. They tell you almost nothing about the biology. Now, a growing number of agricultural testing laboratories are offering biological soil testing. You send them a sample and they sequence the DNA, reporting back the microbial diversity and composition of your soil. They tell you which beneficial organisms are abundant and which are depleted. They tell you if your mycorrhizal fungal populations are healthy. They tell you if the nitrogen-fixing bacteria are present in the numbers needed to do their job. This is still an emerging science. The interpretation of these results, knowing what a healthy microbial community actually looks like for a specific crop in a specific climate, is something scientists are actively working out. There is not yet a universal standard, the way there is for pH or nitrogen. But the direction of travel is clear, toward farming that manages the biology, not just the chemistry. Some companies are also developing biological inputs, products containing living microorganisms that can be applied to soil or seeds to introduce or boost beneficial species. Mycorrhizal inoculants, for example, contain spores of mycorrhizal fungi that can colonize plant roots when applied at seeding. Bacterial inoculants contain nitrogen-fixing or pathogen-suppressing bacteria. Compost teas, liquids brewed from compost that contain billions of soil organisms, are used by some farmers to inoculate their fields with living biology. The results of these products are variable, and scientists caution that adding organisms to soil doesn't guarantee success. They have to survive and establish in the existing community, which depends on many factors. But the principle that managing soil biology is as important as managing soil chemistry is gaining acceptance among agricultural researchers worldwide. I want to tell you about something that happened in the Dust Bowl of North America in the 1930s, because it is perhaps the most dramatic example in modern history of what happens when the hidden world beneath a farm is destroyed on a massive scale. The Great Plains of the United States, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, Nebraska, had been covered for thousands of years by a deep-rooted native grassland. Prairie grasses, some species with roots reaching 6, 8, 10 feet into the ground. This grassland was one of the most biologically productive ecosystems in the world. Its soil, built over 10,000 years by the partnership of grass roots, soil bacteria, fungi, earthworms, and bison, was some of the deepest, richest topsoil on Earth. Between roughly 1900 and 1930, settlers plowed most of it under, millions of acres, in one of the fastest large-scale land transformations in history. The prairie grasses were replaced with wheat and cotton. The deep root networks that held the soil in place were gone. The biological community that had built and maintained that soil was disrupted. Then came drought, a natural climate cycle that would have been survivable under the original grassland, which was adapted to periodic dry periods. But without the prairie grass root systems, without the soil structure maintained by billions of organisms over thousands of years, the topsoil had nothing holding it to the ground. It blew away. Literally, physically. Clouds of topsoil, the accumulated biological work of 10,000 years, rose into the air and turned the sky black at noon. Dust clouds rolled across the plains for days at a time. The dust reached Chicago, reached New York, reached ships 400 miles out in the Atlantic Ocean. 3.5 million people left the region. Their farms were gone. Their land was gone. The soil was gone. It took decades for parts of the affected land to recover. Some areas have still not fully recovered. The Dust Bowl is the most visible lesson ever given about what happens when you ignore the hidden world. When you take the biological community beneath a farm for granted and treat the soil as if it were just dirt to grow things in. It is not dirt. It is alive. But again, the story has a regenerative turn. Since the Dust Bowl, a great deal has been learned about protecting the soil from wind and water erosion. Shelter belts, rows of trees planted at field edges to break the wind. Conservation tillage, reducing or eliminating the plowing that breaks up soil structure. Cover cropping, keeping living roots in the ground year-round to hold the soil in place. And in the underground, where it matters most, the biology is responding to these changes. On farms in the Great Plains today that have adopted no-till farming, meaning they plant their crops without first turning the soil, Researchers have documented remarkable recoveries in soil biological communities over 10 to 15 years. The mycorrhizal networks are rebuilding. Earthworm populations are recovering. The bacteria and fungi that were suppressed by tillage are returning. The hidden world is patient. It is resilient. If you stop destroying it, it begins to rebuild. Not as fast as we destroyed it. Building 10 centimeters of healthy topsoil naturally takes hundreds of years. We cannot simply reverse a century of damage in a decade, but the trajectory can change. The direction of the curve can reverse. And farmers who are seeing this happen on their own land, watching their soil darken, watching their earthworm counts rise, watching their crops become more resilient to drought and disease, often describe it with a kind of wonder that is unusual in practical agriculture. They are watching the world come back to life, beneath their feet. Let me introduce you to something called the root tip, because it is where the drama of the underground world is most concentrated. The root tip is the growing end of a plant root, the point where the root is actively pushing into new soil, extending the plant's reach deeper and wider in search of water and nutrients. The root tip is protected by a structure called the root cap, a dome of cells that functions almost like the nose cone of a rocket. As the root grows forward, the root cap pushes through the soil, and the outer cells of the root cap are slewed off, lubricating the path for the root to advance. These discarded cells don't go to waste. They become part of the rhizosphere chemistry, feeding the soil microorganisms around the tip. Behind the root cap, in a region called the elongation zone, new cells are forming and stretching, generating the pushing force that drives the root through the soil. A growing root tip generates considerable force, enough to crack soft rock, as anyone who has seen tree roots breaking through pavement can attest. And the root tip is sensing its environment constantly. It detects gravity growing downward. It detects water growing toward it. It detects chemical gradients, responding to the signals of beneficial microorganisms, the warnings of pathogens, the presence of minerals. Some research even suggests that root tips respond to sound vibrations at the frequency of running water, though this remains an area of active investigation. The root is exploring. It is not passive. Every extension into new soil is a choice, not a conscious one, but a response to a complex set of signals. And the hidden world is full of signals for the root to read. Now, the story of the hidden world is also the story of the farmers who are learning to work with it. Because this is not just an academic story. This is a story that is being played out right now, on real farms, by real people, making real decisions about their land and their livelihood. I want to tell you about a type of farmer who is becoming increasingly common in many parts of the world. The farmer who has stopped seeing the soil as a medium to manage and started seeing it as a community to serve. These farmers, sometimes called soil health farmers, or regenerative farmers, or simply farmers who have been paying attention, have made changes that their neighbors initially found strange. They stopped plowing. They planted cover crops in mixes of 15 or 20 species, not for any single crop's benefit but for the biological community below. They reduced or eliminated synthetic fertilizers, not because they were against chemistry, but because they had watched their soil become dependent and wanted to restore its independence. They started measuring different things. Instead of just measuring yield per acre, they measured earthworm counts. They measured the aggregate stability of their soil, how well the particles held together when wetted. They measured water infiltration rates. They began keeping records of soil organic matter percentage, watching it climb year by year. Some of them had difficult years. Transition is hard. When you remove synthetic inputs that have been propping up a degraded soil, the biology needs time to rebuild before it can take over the job. Yields can dip. Profits can tighten. Some farmers gave up and returned to conventional practices. But those who persisted, And there are thousands of documented cases now across North America, Europe, Australia, Africa, South America. Those who persisted saw something happen around year 5 or 7 or 10 that changed their understanding of farming permanently. Their soil, for the first time in perhaps decades, began to work. Crops grew without the diseases that had plagued them before. The soil absorbed rainfall in ways it hadn't for years. Drought years that devastated neighboring farms left their fields with acceptable yields. Their input costs dropped substantially, while yields held steady or even improved. The hidden world, given the chance, had done what it evolved to do. There is a generation growing up right now, children who are being taught, in more and more schools and educational programs around the world, to understand the soil not as dirt but as life. This is relatively new. For most of the 20th century, soil science was a specialty field, something studied by agricultural engineers and agronomists, not something taught in primary schools or discussed in mainstream media. The hidden world was hidden not just physically, in the dark beneath our feet, but culturally, in the silence of our education about food and farming. That is changing. The interest in food provenance, where food comes from, how it is grown, what impact it has on the land, has brought soil into more public conversations than ever before. The climate crisis has elevated soil carbon storage as a genuine policy discussion. The regenerative agriculture movement has given farmers and consumers a common language around soil health. And science communication, the work of researchers, journalists, filmmakers, and educators who translate complex soil science into stories that anyone can understand, is making the hidden world visible in a way it never has been before. Because that visibility matters. When people understand that the food they eat depends on a living community of billions of organisms working in concert beneath the ground, something shifts in how they relate to that food. The meal becomes more remarkable. The farm becomes more precious. The soil becomes not a background detail but a central character in the story of human civilization. And perhaps most importantly, the decisions we make as consumers, as voters, as citizens, about what food systems we support, what agricultural policies we advocate for, what we choose to eat and where we buy it, those decisions become informed by a knowledge that most people have never had before. Understanding the hidden world makes us better stewards of it, even if we never farm a day in our lives. Let me tell you about something that scientists have only recently begun to measure: the full extent of the Earth's soil ecosystem. When you combine all the agricultural land, all the forest soil, all the grassland, all the wetland and desert and Arctic soil on Earth, the total is almost incomprehensible. Scientists estimate that the world's soils contain between 1/4 and 1/3 of all the biodiversity on Earth. More species live in soils than in any other habitat combined. The total mass of soil organisms, all the bacteria, all the fungi, all the nematodes, all the earthworms, all the soil animals, exceeds the total mass of all the plants and animals living above ground. More life by weight is hidden underground than walks, swims, flies, or grows on the surface. And this hidden biosphere, this subterranean world we have barely begun to map, drives the processes that make the surface world possible. Soil organisms cycle nutrients. They clean water. They stabilize slopes. They store carbon. They produce compounds that become medicines. They decompose waste. They build fertility. The photosynthesis happening in leaves and the nitrogen fixation happening in root nodules and the decomposition happening in the dark. These are not separate processes. They are one circular system. Energy from the sun captured by leaves, sent down to roots, traded to fungi for minerals, released by bacteria, cycled through the bodies of 1,000 different organisms, returned to the plant, sent back to the sun. A cycle that has been running without interruption since before the first land plant opened its first leaf 450 million years ago. We did not create this system. We inherited it. And for most of human history, we farmed within it, mostly without knowing it was there, benefiting from biological processes we didn't understand. Now we understand them, at least the beginning of them. And with that understanding comes a responsibility that is unusual in the history of agriculture. The responsibility to know what we are doing to the world we cannot see. I want to return, near the end of this story, to something simple. To the smell of rain on soil. You know the smell, that distinctive, almost intoxicating scent that rises when the first drops of rain hit dry earth. It is one of the most universally loved smells in the world. Across cultures, across climates, across centuries, people have described it as the smell of renewal, of relief, of the world returning to life. It even has a name, petrichor, from the Greek words for rock petra and the fluid that flows in the veins of God's ichor, the fluid of the divine rising from stone. But petrichor is not a divine mystery. It has a scientific explanation, and appropriately for this story, that explanation leads us straight back underground. Petrichor is produced largely by a compound called geosmin. Geosmin is made by soil bacteria, particularly a group called actinomycetes, which also produce many of the antibiotics we use in medicine. These bacteria release geosmin as part of their natural metabolic processes. It accumulates in dry soil during periods without rain, and when rain falls, it disturbs the soil, releasing a mist of tiny droplets that carry geosmin into the air. The smell of rain is the smell of soil bacteria. And the reason human beings and many other animals are so sensitively tuned to detect it, even at extraordinarily tiny concentrations, may be because it told our ancestors something important. Water is here. Fertility is returning. The soil is alive. The human nose evolved, over millions of years, to notice the hidden world. We have always known it was there. We just forgot for a while. Final sequence, music building slowly. Camera descends one last time into the soil, moving through root networks, fungal THREADS, bacteria moving in the dark. The next time you walk across a farm, or a garden, or a park, or a field, and your feet press down on the ground, consider what is happening beneath them. A city older than civilization. A network older than trees, a community of billions working in the dark, building the world we live in from the bottom up. Every carrot and every wheat grain, every bean and every apple, every cup of rice that has ever fed a hungry child, all of it began in this hidden world. All of it was made possible by organisms most of us cannot see, doing work most of us have never thought about, in a space most of us have never considered. The farmer who understands this, who kneels in the field and crumbles a handful of soil and sees in it not just dirt, but the history of 400 million years of partnership. That farmer is doing something more than growing food. They are tending to the foundation of life on Earth. And we, who eat what they grow, are part of that story whether we know it or not. Every meal connects us to the hidden world. Every bite of food is a product of those unseen relationships, those microscopic negotiations, those ancient trades made in the dark between root and fungus, between bacteria and soil, between the surface world and the world below. The soil is not dead material beneath our feet. It is the most alive place on Earth. And it has been waiting patiently in the dark for us to notice.